You ever notice how the people who claim to love your heart are often the first ones who try to convince you it's broken? That's how gaslighting begins for the empath. Not with an argument, but with doubt. Empaths don't just listen, they absorb. They read tone, silence, body language, and energy in the room. Their nervous system is tuned to human weather. So when someone lies to an empath, the body feels the storm before the mind can name it. Gaslighters sense that sensitivity and they weaponize it. They learn your empathy before they learn your boundaries. They figure out that you rather repair than retaliate. They know you crave understanding and not dominance. So they twist your empathy into self doubt. Gaslighting doesn't start in chaos, it starts in calm. The manipulator studies you. They memorize what you apologize for. They test how easily you explain yourself. They offer affection after you prove your loyalty. And when they're sure your compassion outweighs your caution, they start rewriting reality. Tiny corrections at first. That's not what I said. You're remembering wrong. Or, I was just joking. Now, each statement teaches your brain to question your own senses. Before long, you're editing your memory to keep the peace. That's the setup, training you to trade self trust to get along. See, the empath begins noticing inconsistencies, broken promises, moods that shift without warning, affection that feels conditional. But when they bring it up, the gaslighter reframes it. You call it hurt, they'll call it overreaction. You call it neglect, they call it independence. You call it manipulation, they call it tough love. This constant reframing forces the empath to interpret abuse as misunderstanding. It's mental gymnastics disguised as communication. And each conversation becomes a performance where truth has to audition for approval. Here's the psychology. When someone challenges your reality long enough, your brain starts seeking external validation for internal feelings. For example, instead of, I know what I felt, it becomes, maybe I'm wrong. That's the nervous system trying to preserve connection. Because for an empath, connection feels like safety, even if the connection hurts. Gaslighters exploit that attachment wiring. They sprinkle enough kindness to reset your hope. Now, the trauma bond is formed not because you're weak, but because your biology equates reconciliation with relief. That's why empaths accept apologies so easily because they confuse it. They believe that's relief, so they just accept it. See, gaslighting rarely looks like yelling. It's subtle. It's a raised eyebrow when you express pain, a sigh that implies you're dramatic, a silent treatment that punishes your emotion. These are psychological silencers. Each small dismissal conditions you to minimize yourself. You start prefacing truth with disclaimers. I might be crazy, but I know it sounds small, but I probably misunderstood, but that's the empath apologizing for being perceptive. After months or years of this cycle, self trust erodes. You stop sharing instinctively. You replay conversations, searching for evidence that you weren't irrational. Your intuition, once loud and confident, becomes quiet. This erosion is exactly what the gaslighter wants because confusion equals control. The less sure you are, the more influence they have. It's not just emotional control, it's psychological reprogramming. Eventually, the empath starts noticing patterns: fatigue that doesn't match physical exertion, anxiety that spikes only around certain people, moments of clarity followed by sudden guilt. These are signs the psyche is waking up. Healing begins the moment you name it. And this is gaslighting. Labeling breaks hypnosis. Once the mind sees the manipulation, the spell loses strength. The empath begins journaling events, checking timelines, comparing words to actions. Facts become anchors, logic becomes medicine, and slowly, emotional balance returns. Self trust rebuilds through consistency, not confrontation. Start by believing your first impression again. Relearn the difference between disagreement and distortion. Not everyone who challenges you is gaslighting, but anyone who makes you doubt clear reality repeatedly is. Now, therapy helps, but so does solitude, because silence restores sensory accuracy. The empath system recalibrates only in quiet. That's why isolation after manipulation feels both painful and necessary, because it's detox. Now, boundaries aren't punishment, they're calibration. When an empath says no, they're not closing the heart, they're protecting perception. Every boundary you set teaches your nervous system what safety feels like again. You start recognizing peace not as boredom, but as baseline. Gaslighters thrive on reaction. Peace starves them. So when you stop explaining, they lose access. When you stop arguing, they lose narrative control. And when you stop absorbing, they lose influence. Freedom for an empath doesn't come from vengeance, it comes from validation of self. You learn that empathy without self belief is martyrdom, that intuition without boundaries is exposure, and that peace doesn't need permission. You reclaim the parts of yourself that they said were too much. You start speaking in full sentences again. You stop editing your truth for people who prefer lies. And the moment you believe yourself again, truly believe yourself, gaslighting can never reach you the same way twice. Gaslighting taught you how powerful perception really is. It showed you that awareness is defense, and it reminded you that being kind doesn't mean being blind. Thanks for listening. Stay covered, stay conscious, stay undefeated. See you on the next one. Bye.